In this exploration of humanity's most foundational thinkers, we delve into the profound worldview of Søren Kierkegaard. During the vibrant intellectual and artistic era known as the Danish Golden Age, this 19th century figure emerged as an exceptionally insightful and highly productive philosopher. Even though he rejected formal academic titles, insisting his focus was simply on the lived human experience and the reality of the existing being, he is widely recognized today as the undisputed founder of Existentialism. This particular philosophical school places immense emphasis on individual existence, wrestling primarily with the profound mystery of what it actually means to be alive. When confronting the nature of our being, Kierkegaard passionately maintained that you must do more than merely ponder the question. You must transform your daily actions into a deeply personal answer to it. Championing this subjective experience stands as one of his most significant intellectual triumphs, elevating a shared human reality that scholars had historically dismissed as trivial. Indeed, for nearly 2,000 years prior, the rigid, objective frameworks established by Plato and Aristotle had thoroughly dominated academic discourse. Although he laid the essential groundwork for existentialist ideology, the movement did not experience a widespread cultural surge until a full century after his passing, largely propelled by the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. While humanity has undoubtedly achieved remarkable technological and scientific advancements since that time, the interior landscape of the individual remains largely unchanged. Since the dawn of civilization, every person has navigated the exact same emotional spectrum of joy and suffering that defines our shared human condition. According to his perspective, you interpret reality based entirely on your personal will and the core values that shape your identity, meaning that our internal moral compass literally constructs the world we experience. Born into a tragic family dynamic, Søren was the youngest of 7 siblings, though early deaths eventually left him with only his brother Peter, a future bishop. Despite struggling with a frail constitution and a minor physical impairment, the intellectually gifted boy remained his father's undeniable favorite. Born to a housemaid during his father's second marriage at 57 years old, just months after his first wife passed away. Growing up, he stood out as an eccentric child among his classmates, a trait that, combined with his father's intense mentorship, likely forged his razor-sharp intellect and quick-witted nature. This upbringing allowed him to mentally navigate various modes of consciousness, heavily influenced by a patriarch who was both devoutly religious and profoundly sorrowful. Famously, while tending sheep at 11 years old, freezing, famished, and completely isolated, the elder Kierkegaard had once stood upon a small hill and cursed God, a moment of crushing despair he could not shake even 71 years later. Eventually amassing vast wealth as a Copenhagen merchant, his father passed away at 82 years old, bequeathing a substantial fortune to his son. Following his father's demise, the young scholar experienced a radical spiritual awakening, embracing a profound love for God that he viewed as the ultimate remedy for his innate sorrow and the true purpose of his life. During his studies in Copenhagen, he became deeply infatuated with Regine Olsen, yet, by 27 years old, he remained entirely directionless in terms of a profession. He found himself torn between marrying her and pursuing the pastoral career his father had envisioned, though his intense disdain for the institutionalized church severely complicated the latter path. His only other viable alternative was to cultivate his eccentricities and unique talents, embracing the life of a marginalized intellectual and dedicating himself entirely to literature. Realizing that his entire destiny hinged on this single crossroad, he recognized that the sheer act of choosing is the absolute core of human existence. Ultimately, he severed his engagement to Regine Olsen, sparking immense emotional turmoil and a fierce public scandal that led to his rapid social exile. Fully committed to a path of solitude, he resolved to survive as an independent author, funded entirely by his paternal inheritance. Naturally, he utilized his own complex psyche as the foundation for his work, driven by an overwhelming need to dissect and articulate his highly unusual disposition. Relentless ridicule and harsh caricatures published by the satirical journal Corsair pushed the writer into even profounder seclusion, though this bullying only fueled his resolve to strike back through his prose. To the general populace, his expansive literary universe, filled with a diverse array of conceptual personas, appeared akin to a theatrical performance, much like how the official church presented its version of Christianity. However, he drew a sharp distinction between the two, noting that a stage play openly admits its fictional nature, whereas religious institutions function as a deceitful performance desperately attempting to conceal their inherent artificiality. Illustrating this absurdity, he penned a famous parable about a backstage fire at a theater where a frantic clown's warnings were met with uproarious applause from an audience convinced it was merely part of the act. He concluded that the apocalypse itself would likely arrive to the thunderous cheers of intellectuals who mistakenly assume disaster is just a clever punchline. Driven by an unrelenting creative fire, he composed texts tirelessly from dawn until late in the night, remarkably releasing 9 distinct volumes in 1843 alone. These works offered an unprecedented microscopic examination of human potential, utilizing a labyrinth of pen names and deliberate literary deceptions designed to trick the audience into confronting the truth. Ultimately, his intricate strategies were formulated to force you, the reader, to arrive at your own independent deductions without relying on external authorities. By dissecting various avenues of living, he aimed to demonstrate that genuine Christian devotion acts as a rigorous spiritual practice, one capable of elevating our unique individuality to its absolute peak. His singular, unwavering focus remained fixed on this concept of inward subjectivity, standing in stark contrast to his contemporary Karl Marx, who instead viewed humanity primarily as a collective force, intertwined with sweeping historical movements. When the march of history is viewed as our only salvation, the actions of a single person lose their significance, reducing life to an impersonal force that ignores individual existence. Søren Kierkegaard adopted a radically contrasting perspective, arguing that the forefront of reality is shaped entirely by our own deliberate choices, which dictate our identities and the nature of the world you will find yourself in. His approach is fundamentally rooted in decisive action and willpower, insisting that humanity's primary duty is to cultivate true individuality. You can only achieve this authentic selfhood through resolute choices, a stark contrast to Marxist thought from the 1840s that continues to frame profound philosophical divides today. He harbored a deep concern that modern consumer culture would swallow the individual, turning people into indistinguishable parts of a mindless collective. The authentic spiritual journey was suffocating beneath a heavy layer of shared civic, political, and theological delusions. While exceptional figures of the past sought to propagate the Christian faith, Kierkegaard saw his mission as halting its deceitful dilution. He believed that institutional ineptitude had completely inverted a faith originally designed to champion individual uniqueness. Contemptuous of both a mob mentality and superficial societal gatherings, he recognized the paradox of trying to forge a singular identity while inescapably bound to a community where civic and religious lives had fused. Ultimately, we carve out our purpose by striving for logical choices within an inherently absurd universe. To distance his own identity from his arguments, Kierkegaard often credited his philosophical works to fabricated authors, constructing elaborate facades that included fictional editors and compilers. His ultimate idol was Socrates, a thinker we only comprehend through the lens of Plato, who functioned as a master of irony and layered meanings. Much like Socrates, who lacked a rigid ideological framework, lived a life of relentless self-inquiry, and ultimately faced death for his persistent questioning, Kierkegaard envisioned his own intellectual path. He fiercely resisted any attempt to confine his ideas into a neat framework, recognizing that rigid systematization, much like the approach of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, drains the vitality right out of human thought. For him, the essence of philosophy lies not in mastering abstract theories, but in intimately exploring the lived human experience. By utilizing aliases like the well-known Johannes Climacus, he adopted diverse psychological masks to fully inhabit and explore contrasting philosophical vantage points. He was known to release multiple volumes simultaneously, with each text arguing against the others from completely opposing ideological stances. Because of this intricate web of viewpoints, pinning down the exact beliefs that the author personally championed becomes a formidable challenge. In his foundational text, Either/Or, he outlines two distinct modes of existence, the aesthetic and the ethical. He challenges you to view these paradigms not merely as concepts, but as encompassing lifestyles, suggesting that every person operates primarily within one of these spheres, even if their boundaries occasionally blur. The initial phase of human development is characterized by the aesthetic, a concept rooted in the Greek appreciation for beauty, which immerses a person in sensory delights like music, theatrical drama, and romantic conquest. Embracing this lifestyle requires a relentless pursuit of maximum gratification, serving as a desperate defense mechanism against the creeping dread of monotony. Often, the mere anticipation of a thrilling event delivers far more joy than the actual experience itself. Yet, this mindset is ultimately framed as a juvenile state of being, where satisfaction is fleeting and actions are devoid of genuine altruism. Sooner or later, an individual must outgrow this superficial phase and begin the pursuit of more profound, principled satisfactions. Stepping into the ethical realm marks the second major phase, where we discover that acting selflessly for the benefit of others carries its own unique sense of fulfillment. This stage is governed by collective moral guidelines that dictate proper behavior, closely mirroring what psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud later described as the superego, our internalized collection of societal values and institutional norms. These principles form a logical framework designed to uphold the greater good of the community, echoing the rigid moral structures proposed by Immanuel Kant. Despite its stability, this principled existence still falls short of true self-discovery, as it merely requires you to conform to a pre-existing checklist of acceptable behaviors. Consequently, a person is left at a crossroads, forced to choose between passive conformity and active, conscious engagement with the world around them. Rather than dictating which path you should strictly follow, Kierkegaard designed his work to demonstrate that true philosophy is intimately bound to our everyday human struggles. When intellectual inquiry becomes overly theoretical, it risks losing its relevance to our actual lives. So he grounded his ideas in the messy reality of the human condition, where our true search for meaning must occur. Building upon the foundation of Either/Or, he penned Stages on Life's Way to introduce a third, culminating phase of existence, the religious stage. While he identified as a devout believer, his radical interpretation of faith made him entirely distinct from conventional practitioners of his era. The second variation depicts the patriarch refusing to carry out the execution, resulting in his profound spiritual disillusionment. A third perspective shows him rejecting the act and subsequently begging for divine pardon simply for harboring the thought of harming his child. In the fourth interpretation, his inability to follow through causes Isaac to doubt his own spiritual convictions, witnessing his father's defiance of a heavenly order. Kierkegaard posits a paradoxical reality here, arguing that sacrificing the boy represents a moral atrocity, yet simultaneously stands as an act of profound religious righteousness. This agonizing conflict between moral duty and divine obedience inflicts immense psychological torment upon Abraham. To navigate this, he executes what the philosopher terms a teleological suspension of the ethical. By temporarily discarding societal morality to obey a higher command, he demonstrates absolute trust in a righteous, ultimate outcome, thereby elevating his spiritual devotion above all human ethical constructs. Fear and Trembling explores the complex dynamic between mortality and spirituality, mirroring how either/or previously unpacked the conflict between aesthetic indulgence and moral responsibility. Within these pages, the author draws a sharp contrast between the Knights of Infinite Resignation and the Knights of Faith. Those belonging to the former category consciously detach themselves from earthly attachments, finding solace by fully accepting their profound losses. To illustrate this, the philosopher presents a tragic romance involving an ordinary man hopelessly infatuated with a royal princess. The resigned knight entirely abandons any hope of uniting with his beloved in the physical realm. Consequently, his passion transforms into an eternal, spiritualized devotion that remains immune to worldly destruction, allowing the agony of unfulfilled longing to bring him profound inner peace. Conversely, the Knight of Faith mirrors that initial process of letting go, but boldly takes an astonishing leap beyond it. This individual places absolute, unwavering trust in both himself and the Creator, convinced that heavenly intervention makes all things achievable. Even when a worldly union appears logically impossible, this person genuinely believes the divine possibility will somehow bring them together in this very lifetime. Much of the philosopher's broader literary corpus is dedicated to meticulously dissecting these intense psychological states, focusing heavily on profound despair, the weight of the absurd, and the inescapable nature of human dread. The philosopher's exploration of angst stands as one of the most brilliant psychological insights formulated prior to the era of Freud. You and I possess an extraordinary capacity for free will, a gift that is simultaneously intoxicating and deeply frightening. True anxiety emerges the moment you comprehend your own autonomy, staring into the vast, undefined potentials of your future and realizing your total control over them. This concept of dread forms a cornerstone of his existential thought, representing an overwhelming terror that lacks any specific, identifiable trigger. This objectless dread is inherently paralyzing because it remains invisible. You are simply haunted by a pervasive sense that calamity is approaching. Confronted with a boundless array of potential paths, you can easily become paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of your options. While anyone would quickly claim to be a unique, autonomous individual, failing to exercise that agency while drowning in an endless ocean of potential outcomes effectively strips you of your practical freedom. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Kierkegaard warns against the trap of the finite, where you severely limit your horizons by blindly adhering to cultural norms and societal pressures. The truly terrifying aspect of this conformity is how thoroughly hidden it is. Most people remain convinced that their heavily conditioned behaviors are entirely their own deliberate choices. Consider an individual who marries his teenage sweetheart, secures a predictable mortgage, and settles into a conventional career, not out of authentic desire, but simply because he is following a socially prescribed script. Eventually realizing this profound self-deception, he might drastically upend his life, abandoning his family and career to search for meaning, only to end up trapped in a menial job while perpetually daydreaming about a better tomorrow. To escape this suffocating dichotomy, the philosopher insists you must take a profound leap of faith. Although this choice defies all logical reasoning, he argues it remains the most deeply rational step you can take to reclaim your personal agency. By boldly making that deeply subjective commitment, you step into authentic individuality, which serves as his foundational argument for embracing genuine Christianity within an inherently absurd world. We navigate an existence fraught with profound contradictions. caught between a pervasive terror of our inevitable demise and an equally paralyzing dread of eternal existence. You might attempt to impose a structured worldview or a philosophical template over the chaotic nature of reality in an effort to make sense of your journey. However, Kierkegaard confidently asserts that any such artificial framework is guaranteed to eventually fracture and collapse under the weight of life's complexities. This leaves you facing a critical question. Will you endlessly construct new, fragile paradigms just to see if one finally holds up? Perhaps the flaw actually lies within the framework itself, prompting thinkers like Kierkegaard to advise that you must begin your philosophical journey by looking inward. The philosopher emphasized true subjectivity in his writings, warning against the trap of seeking your personal identity within artificial structures built by others, which likely fail their creators anyway. He questioned the value of mastering vast theoretical doctrines to design an abstract reality that exists merely for public display, rather than for authentic personal experience. Instead, he argued that genuine understanding must be integrated deeply into your everyday reality, recognizing this personal assimilation as the absolute highest priority. You are required to fully claim your own reality, embracing the absolute accountability that accompanies such ownership. Navigating life involves immense peril, simply because you can never be entirely certain that your chosen path is the correct one. Kierkegaard believed that fully comprehending this profound uncertainty inevitably leads to a deep sense of dread, as these personal truths rely entirely on faith rather than measurable proof, resting essentially on a void. When confronted with the stark emptiness and sheer unpredictability of being, he proposed that the sole escape from such psychological chaos is committing to a courageous leap of faith. Ultimately, a person finds rescue from this existential despair by aligning their deeply subjective inner world with the divine. By 1855, the 42-year-old thinker found himself entirely drained of both physical vitality and the financial inheritance left by his father. Following a sudden collapse on a public thoroughfare, he was moved to a medical ward where he obstinately refused final religious rites from attending clergy, while also denying entry to his brother Peter, an ordained bishop. He spent his concluding days launching a fierce intellectual crusade against institutionalized religion, dismantling what he considered a widespread societal delusion. At that time, the state religion was actively endorsing the rapid advancement of Danish culture, assuming the emerging progressive government would merely act as an extension of their theological dominance. His subsequent burial drew an unexpectedly massive gathering that quickly erupted into protests, as citizens furiously objected to the religious establishment claiming the remains of a man who had so fiercely opposed them. The resulting public chaos served as an incredibly appropriate finale for an individual who consistently navigated the world as a brilliant anomaly and a resolute outcast.